Hi everybody, I'm Scott Haley. I'm the CSU wheat breeder, and appreciate you all turning out today to come to the first of 3 of our virtual field days here for the Colorado wheat field days this year. So my job here today is to, well, first I should thank our videographers. We have Sally Jones behind the camera and Roger Tyler there, making sure we keep on track with time. So my job here today is to go through the varieties kind of as we normally do at a typical field day situation. And before we do, I want to just comment about a couple of things. I'll be addressing various issues as we go down and look through some of the varieties. But this booklet here, the 2019 Colorado Winter Wheat Variety Performance Trial Report, the Making Better Decisions booklet, I'd like to point out a couple of things about this booklet. And that is for those of you who may be attending in-person field days later this week and early next week, copies of those will be passed out, but these are also on the web at csucrops.com, and you can also find them at the CSU wheat breeding webpage at wheat.colostate.edu. So guess we should have said at the outset, we're here at our Orchard, Colorado trial location. And this is one of 11 trial locations that the CSU Crops Testing Program has in the Uniform Variety Performance Trial. This year there are 52 different entries in this trial. 52 different entries in this trial, and they represent a collection of different public varieties, public reds, public whites, and we have a number of different company varieties, herbicide tolerant varieties, and wheat stem sawfly tolerant varieties. So we kind of have them arranged here in sort of maybe a logical order so that we can maybe kind of tell a little tale as we go down through the varieties. So in the booklet that you will have there, you will see that last year's trial summary is on page 11, and the 2-year summary is on page 12, and then the 3-year summary is on page 13. So I wanted to bring those up because many of you who've been to field days over the years will recall that I've said over the years that probably one of the best things that we could do in terms of utilizing variety trial data to make informed variety selection decisions is to not pay attention to any individual trial location. We need to pay attention to multiple locations across multiple years, and so that's what the 2- and 3-year summaries represent. So we also have the tool, the Colorado Wheat Variety Database, which is at ramwheatdb.com, and all of those various links to different resources I think are on page 4 or 5 of the booklet there. So that's a very handy tool for coming up with summaries. If you want to do especially like head-to-head comparisons between 2 varieties, it's a very, very, very handy tool. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is from pages 26 to 31, we have the variety characteristics table. And I'll be addressing a number of different things as we look at the varieties here, but let's face it, I can't remember every single different characteristic. I'm going to forget some, I'm going to gloss over some. So I would just look at that as being maybe a handy resource that you can use for determining what disease and insect resistance traits, quality, straw strength, things like that. So the last thing that I'd like to point out in the booklet there is quality reports. Each year going back to, I guess, 2007, we've been evaluating in the CSU Wheat Quality Lab, we've been evaluating the milling and baking quality of samples from the variety trials. And last year's sample evaluations start on page 26 to 30, starts on page 32. And the data from those evaluations are used to come up with the milling and baking quality scores that we have in the characteristics table. So this year we added a couple of summaries. Summaries across locations for the dryland trial and then for the irrigated trial. And I just would like to encourage everybody to pay attention to those quality scores. I'm in my 22nd year here at CSU, and when I came here, quality was a big problem, right? We were planting a lot of TAM 107 and Prairie Red, and we've done a lot to fix that. And I guess maybe just kind of in a general sense, looking at competing with Russia in terms of the global hard red winter wheat market, you're not going to do it by trying to sell quality that's similar to the stuff that they're selling from Russia. So there's a number of varieties in last year's trials that continue to be in this year's trials that have problems with regards to quality, and I'm not going to highlight any of them. You can look at those scores yourself. Okay, so the last thing in the report, and Jerry I think will be talking about that in his online presentation, is a very nice question and answer summary on wheat stem sawfly prepared by Frank Piers, and then a story on coaxium wheat, and then something from Wilma Trujillo on sensor-based nitrogen management. So with that, that's all I'll refer to in the book. Okay, so we're starting right here at the group of hard red winter wheats, and we're starting with the CSU and the Plains Gold varieties. We have Bird on my right, Avery I'm standing right in front of, and then Langen here on my left. And collectively between these three wheats, these comprise about 52% of Colorado's wheat acres. The variety survey from 2020 had Langen number 1, Avery number 2, and Bird number 3. So this is the first year in, I guess, like 6 years that Bird has not been the number 1 variety on the survey. But one of the things we'll see when we get down through some of the other varieties is how that variety Bird has figured into is figuring into the parentage of some of our more recently released varieties. So Bird, I think many producers very familiar with. 2011, Avery was released a few years later in 2015, and you know, we've had these things head to head for quite a number of years now. So we thought that the yield of them was pretty similar, but when you look at the lower yielding locations, we see about a 3 to 4 bushel advantage of Avery relative to Bird. So it's a little more uniform, a little bit larger kernels, slightly better baking quality, a little bit. But both of these varieties are very susceptible to stem rust, stripe rust, excuse me. I'll get to stem rust in a minute. And so Langen, that was one of the things we've been working on very hard the last few years, is to try to get stripe rust resistance back into some of our more common varieties. Just like to maybe take a slight little tangent now. Some of the people may have heard that it's possible that we have a new race of stripe rust now in the Great Plains, and we're learning more about this, and I've seen a little bit of data. What we're seeing is that some of the varieties have completely lost their resistance. Some of the varieties that were kind of intermediate may have lost some of them, and then some that maybe were on the resistant side, some have lost the resistance and some haven't. So when I talk about stripe rust resistance here, this is really going to be based on observations and data from past years. So Langen is this one here on my left, and again, Langen is the number 1 planted variety in Colorado. It's very early maturing compared to Avery, which then is a couple of days later than Bird. And that's, I guess, one of the concerns that I have with it. Probably a variety you might want to avoid planting a little bit too early so that you can avoid some of those spring freezes. Drought stress tolerance is very good. Winter hardiness is second to none. Quality is really good, and stripe rust resistance has been very good. We've had that scored as about a 3 in the characteristics table. So one of the things that we also see commonality between these three varieties is they're all very susceptible to stem rust. Stem rust is a disease which we have not had, I'd say, almost at all here in Colorado in the 22 years I've been here, but it is always a concern. It's a devastating disease. So we've been working very hard to try to get some decent stem rust in some of our varieties, and I'll talk about that as we see some of the other varieties down the line. So the other thing I wanted to point out about Langen and Avery and Bird, straw strength is not very good. And when I talk about straw strength, what I mean is lodging. Like when we get very high yields and the producer's not perhaps used a growth regulator, we can see these varieties go down quite a bit. And so that's also been another area of focus in the program these last few years. Whistler is here on my right and Canvas is here on my left. Both of these wheats were released in 2018. They're very different wheats in terms of their overall growth patterns and heights and maturity. Let's just start with Whistler. Whistler is a wheat, again, derived with 50% bird parentage. It also has snow mass in the parentage, and that brought really good quality into Whistler. This variety has about 3 to 4% higher water absorption, which is a very important characteristic for the baker, and that's something we've also been working pretty hard on. It's a tall wheat, it's later maturing, and it has lower test weight. And so we have an experimental in the trials this year Colorado 15D098R, which is in the back set, and we won't look at it. But I'm looking at that a lot as maybe kind of an early replacement for Whistler. It is tall, maybe not quite as late, but it has test weight, again, that's second to none, and that's really important. So the stripe rust resistance has been very good in Whistler. And the other thing that I should, and I kind of forgot to say with regards to Avery, Bird, and Langan, is all of these varieties, Canvas 2 as well as Guardian, that I'll get to in a minute, carry genes for resistance to the wheat curl mite, which transmits wheat streak mosaic virus. And we've seen that gene to be highly effective in field trial locations where we've had a high enough level of wheat streak mosaic virus infection and able to be able to get a note. Okay, so Whistler as well as Canvas will both be more broadly available as certified seed for planting this fall. Again, they were released 2 years ago. Canvas is a very different type than we see in Whistler. It's a shorter type, it's more medium maturing, and it has really good straw strength. And not everything in the program has poor straw strength like we see in Bird and Avery. Canvas is one that's very good. I think we have it scored as a 1 in the characteristics table. It's got very good test weight, very good combined resistance to all 3 of the rust diseases that we have. And again, it carries that wheat curl mite resistance from Bird, and we've seen that to be highly effective in Canvas. So where I envision Canvas fitting in Colorado, and maybe looking at not the entirety, but looking at the western Great Plains, is for those high-end, high-input, dry land, as well as irrigated conditions. You're going to see Canvas performing very well. So the next one that we have here on my left is Guardian, and Guardian was released from our program just this past fall. And Guardian is a very, very unique wheat in a lot of different respects. And I'll just kind of enumerate them. In terms of grain yield, its yield level has been pretty similar to Avery, which is a few bushels less than we see in Langan, which is a few bushels less than we see in Whistler and sometimes Canvas. So Guardian's more like that Avery yield level, but it has a number of other features that are really exciting, I think. So it has very good combined resistance to all 3 rusts. It has very good test weight, very good baking quality characteristics, and it's unique among the wheats in this trial in that it carries 2 different mechanisms for resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus. It carries that same gene that these other wheats have, which helps to prevent the infestation from the wheat curl mite, but then it also has the gene for resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus itself, the same gene that we've seen in snowmass and some of the other wheats that we'll see here in the trial. So we've seen in the very few opportunities that we've had in Colorado these last few years, had an opportunity to see that work, and it works really good. And so we've had just look at some of the irrigated trial locations these last few years, as well as Burlington going back to 2017. The resistance is highly effective against the current population of wheat curl mites that we have. So having said that about wheat streak, as a breeder, I just absolutely have to make the point that I feel that if we try to rely on that genetic resistance too much, right, we're going to put too much selection pressure on that wheat curl mite population to try to overcome that resistance. And so use this tool diligently, perhaps planting it next to maybe your neighbors or whoever that don't control their volunteer. If you're looking to plant an early wheat, right, planting a wheat earlier in your planting season, Guardian would be a good fit for that. So again, that was just released this past fall, and seed will be available more broadly in fall of 2021. The last thing that I wanted to mention about Guardian is grain protein. And I did a story in the Making Better Decisions booklet a few years ago about grain protein and how I look at grain protein. Did some different kinds of analyses. Guardian is really good for making grain protein. It's as good as any variety here in this trial. So we have 3 years of data on that, and I feel pretty comfortable in that. So that's another perhaps selling feature of Guardian. So the last 3 of the, I guess, conventional hard red winter wheats that we have here in this group are from other public breeding programs in the Great Plains, KS Dallas and KS Western Star, Dallas here on my right and Western Star on my left. And then we have TAM 114 there, a couple of spots down. So these two wheats, this is the first year that they're in the CSU Dryland Variety Trials. We've seen them in irrigated, or in our regional breeder trials the last few years, and they've done very well, but we haven't really seen a lot of yield data in Colorado, so I don't really have much to comment about that. Both of the wheats are very good in terms of combined resistance to all three rusts. KS Western Star, interestingly, is a cross with bird, and it also carries that same gene for resistance to the wheat curl mite that I mentioned in some of these other varieties here. KS Dallas, though, is unique in that it carries two different genes for resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus, so to the virus itself. KS Dallas does not carry resistance to the mite, but it has two different mechanisms of genetic resistance to the virus once infection occurs. So we haven't talked about this a whole lot in Colorado in terms of temperature sensitivity of one of the particular virus resistance genes. I will mention that here now when we look at these. KS Dallas carries that same gene for the wheat streak mosaic virus resistance that Guardian, Snowmass, other wheats have. But the second gene that it has is not sensitive to higher temperatures. And so, so what they've observed in Kansas sometimes is that you can have the gene that's in Guardian or Snowmass become ineffective if temperatures are up above around 70 to 75 degrees in the fall. So that is all I know about these. Quality of them is both pretty good. They both seem to tiller pretty well. I think you can see that here. And so we'll see how they yield head to head here with the CSU wheats and the others here in the trial. So the last of the public red ones that we have here is TAM 114. TAM 114, like all the TAM predecessors, came from the Texas A&M program. And kind of an interesting one, it was in our trials a few years back, 15 through 17. So we have a 3-year average. Then Texas A&M's marketing partner for this wheat, AgSeco, chose to not enter it in our trials the last 2 years, and then this year they've chose to enter it in the trials again. So the yield data, we have a yield record on this wheat. It's a few bushels lower yielding than Avery. It's good resistance to stripe rust though, and really, really good quality. And so it has been a pretty consistent dryland performer. So I mentioned that Colorado 15D098R a few minutes ago, and that wheat actually is derived from a cross with TAM 114. So that's the way the breeder thinks, is try to find good wheats and make crosses and try to develop something better. I'm standing right in between two of the coaxium wheats that we have in the trial. And again, there's a story in your booklet about the coaxium wheats and how that fits into we at CSU, people in my program, is collaboration with the wheat scientists, developed a novel herbicide tolerance trait, which, like Clearfield wheat, which we released back in 2001, is effective against winter annual grassy weeds. So the nice thing about coaxium is it's really good on rye. And I think that was maybe one of the, not Achilles' heels, but one of the issues that many producers had with Clearfield wheat. Incline AX was the first that we released back in 2017. And it's a wheat that I just really don't like at all. And it's too late for us here in Colorado. And it has test weight like triticale. And quality's no good, but we felt that it was important to get a coaxium wheat out onto the market in a producer's hands so the producers could begin to get some experience with that. So the next year then, 2018, we were able to release Crescent AX, and I look at Crescent as fixing some of the things that I really dislike about Incline AX, in particular the maturity. So probably have this scored as a 9 for maturity. Crescent AX would be scored as a 3, so it's quite a bit earlier, maybe not quite as early as Langan. And it also has very good test weight. So those are two very important things for us here in Colorado. It was derived from bird parentage, and so it's very susceptible to stripe rust, though it does look pretty good with the wheat curl mites and wheat streak mosaic virus infection. So one of the things that many producers in Colorado saw this year with Crescent, you may recall that we had these really bad freezes back in April, and Crescent took that a little bit worse than some of the other varieties. It wasn't alone in that regard, but it was noticeably worse. I was amazed though to see how it came back. We had very severe freeze damage at our Fort Collins location. Took pictures back in, I don't know, it was around April 10th or whatever it was. Very severe damage, and within 2 weeks you couldn't even tell that there was any damage had occurred. So that's one of the things that I like about Crescent. And I just add that we've not seen that kind of a freeze, you know, an April freeze do damage like we saw here in Colorado this year. So the next one that we have is I should point out that in the second tier, there are 3 other coaxium wheats in the trial. Lima Grain has one called LCS Helix AX, and then there's two wheats from Winfield. And so you'll see those are listed in your booklet there too. So the next one that we have here is Bird CL Plus. Bird CL Plus is a Clearfield wheat that we released from our program in 2018. Again, this is marketed by Plains Gold. This was derived by what we call backcrossing the 2 Clearfield genes into Bird. So it's an awful lot like Bird, but not 100% so. It has a little bit better straw strength, still just as susceptible to stripe rust. Its yield has actually been a little bit higher than Bird, and the yield has been about 10% higher than we see in Brawl CL Plus. So we're looking at this as being a higher yielding Clearfield option for producers who are interested in using the Clearfield production system. The other thing I should say as we stand here, as we saw it actually just right here across the road last year, was under very severe sawfly pressure, wheat stem sawfly pressure, we saw Bird CL Plus standing up noticeably and visually better than all of the other hollow stem varieties. So it's possible that it carries some sort of like non-preference to the wheat stem sawfly. But we'll talk about wheat stem sawfly, other mechanisms that we're looking at when we talk about those varieties. Okay, so I'm standing right in between 2 wheats which carry genetic resistance to the wheat stem sawfly. And as I commented earlier, there's a very nice story in here about the wheat stem sawfly. And this trial location here has kind of become, unfortunately, one of the epicenters of the wheat stem sawfly problem that we have in Colorado. The first wheat that we have here is a Fortified SF, and then I'm standing next to, on my left here, an experimental line, Colorado 16 SF070, which you'll see in your booklet there. So those producers who are paying attention to wheat stem sawfly, we recall a number of years ago we had wheats like Judy, Bear Paw, Warhorse in this trial. These are winter wheat varieties from Montana that carry a solid stem trait characteristic, where the stem, to varying different degrees, instead of being hollow, is semi-solid, even up to solid. So what we've been trying really hard to do is to get that characteristic into our wheats, right? But have them yield at least on par with some of the other wheats that we have in our program. Producers may recall, or they can go to ramwheatdb.com and look at comparisons from 2013 to 2015 between Bird and Bear Paw. 30% yield drag from that characteristic. So this is one drawback that we're going to have with this solid stem trait. It costs about 10 to 15% of the yield of that plant to make that stem be more solid. So the cross for Fortified SF we made in 2013. We released that variety just this past fall. So it was 6 years from cross to release, which is probably pretty close to a record in the winter wheat world. And the level of solidness that we have in Fortified SF, we call it semi-solid. So we score the solidness on a 5 being completely hollow to a 25 being completely solid scale. If anybody's curious about where those numbers come from, just give me a call or shoot me an email. And something like Bear Paw here in Colorado, we've seen it produce a solid stem of about an 18 or a 19. Fortified SF is running about a 13 to a 14. So it's more what we would call semi-solid. In field trials here in Colorado under severe sawfly pressure though, we've seen that level of solidness result in dramatic reductions in the degree of cutting that we observe in the plots from the wheat stem sawfly. So that source of stem solidness is one approach that we've been taking at CSU to try to combat this problem. here in this field we have another experiment with another source of solidness which is expressed earlier in the season, and then after the sawfly flights decline, then that solidness goes away. You can't detect it anymore, and what they've observed in Montana is that there's not that same degree of yield drag that we see in this other source of solidness. So I'm optimistic that that will work here, and I'm also optimistic that we'll get some data here this year to see how that works. So Fortified SF was released this last fall. Very curious to see how it works in producers' fields. Colorado 16 SF070 would be our second addition to this. This could be released this fall. It's about 3 notches better in the solidness than we see in Fortified SF, and it's shown about 3 to 4 bushel higher yields. A little bit better quality, and it also has a little bit of stripe rust resistance, whereas Fortified SF does not. So in addition to those 2 different mechanisms of stem solidness, we're also working, looking at some others, and I commented about the tolerance or non-preference. We're seeing that, and this will continue to be one of the CSU wheat breeding program's most important objectives moving forward. So the last group of wheats here that I'll be talking about today are the hard white wheats. And you know, I came to CSU in 1999. The hard white wheat breeding program had already started with additional investments from Colorado Wheat back in 1994. But it was really the discovery of snowmass back in 2007, 2008, was released in 2009, which changed everything for us in terms of hard white wheat. So we have been working really hard for the last 10, 12 years on developing hard white wheat varieties that have superior quality, and then getting that quality into a package that has the yield and the disease resistance and all the other characteristics that wheat producers demand. So producers will recall snowmass that we still have it in the trials. It's in the second tier of plots here. You know, going back 10 years, snowmass was really a top yielder, and you know, but time changed, and hard red winter wheat breeding keeps moving along too, right? So we've been working hard to try to get higher yielding and all these other characteristics. So I'm standing here in between Breck on my right and Snowmass 2.0 on my left, and Breck was released in 2017, and Snowmass 2.0 was released in 2018. So Breck was derived from a cross with Antero and Denali, who were both in the cross. It has a number of different characteristics that separate it from Snowmass. Snowmass lost its stripe rust resistance. Breck still has had good resistance. Super high test weight in Breck. I'd wager anybody who wants to take me up on it, Breck will have the highest test weight of anything here in this trial. Much better straw strength. What I mean again is lodging resistance that we see in Breck. The quality though was not quite to the same level that Snowmass was. So Ardent Mills, together with the Colorado Wheat Research Foundation, adopted kind of a 2-tier premium program, and Breck, together with Sunshine and Thunder CL, were only commanding that lower premium. So now that premium 2-tiered premium structure is gone away, and all of them are treated the same. And so I think there's information in the booklet too on that. So Breck has performed very well in the trials. I talked about some of its desirable features. I had commented earlier about the protein, you know, the ability to make protein that we see in Guardian. Breck is just the same. And you know, when I did all these analyses, one of the things I learned was Snowmass was miserable. And so many times I'd hear from producers saying, it doesn't matter how much nitrogen I apply, I cannot get protein out of Snowmass. And so we've addressed that quite a bit in these new 2 wheats. So Snowmass 2.0 came out a couple years later, and as is obvious, that name was chosen because it's was the most similar, it's the closest we've been able to get quality-wise to Snowmass. And it has the same water absorption characteristics and the strong dough mixing properties. It carries another characteristic we've been working very hard on, is low polyphenol oxidase, which is something which is important in whole grain flour applications. It's had good stripe rust resistance. It carries the same wheat streak mosaic virus resistance gene that Snowmass has. Better straw strength certainly than we see in Snowmass. So you look in your booklet there in the 3-year averages, it's right up there with the best reds in the trials these last number of years. So if I could wave my magic wand, which obviously I can't, but if I could wave my magic wand and say that the High Plains will grow nothing but hard white wheat, I would do that, because there's so many advantages in terms of producing something that the buyer wants. The last wheat I think that I have here is another hard white wheat. This is Monarch, which was released the same year as Snowmass 2.0 a couple of years ago. This wheat is not part of the CWRF Ardent Mills Ultra Grain Premium program. It's my understanding, though, that they will accept grain delivery of this, and so it's not like you wouldn't have a market at all. Monarch has done very well in the dryland trials, but where it's really shined has been under irrigation. It's been the best straw strength we've ever been able to develop at CSU, and that's saying something. It's shown top yields in the irrigated trials, and quality characteristics are good, but again, not still to that same level that we see in Snowmass 2.0 or Brett. The last one that I'm going to talk about here is the last of the hard white wheats. Here in this front range of plots, we of course have quite a number of new experimentals in the program. This is KS Silverado from the breeding program at the CSU, Kansas State program at Hays, Kansas. Was released last year, the same as KS Western Star and KS Dallas. It's marketed by the Kansas Wheat Alliance, a similar sort of organization as the Colorado Wheat Research Foundation. So we don't have yield data of this in Colorado, and so we'll see how it does head-to-head with some of our varieties this year, but like the other Kansas ones that we saw, very good combined resistance to the rust diseases, some good wheat streak tolerance, decent quality characteristics, and so we'll get a much better look at this moving forward. So that concludes my presentation about the varieties, and I just wanted to say that some of you have heard, I'm sure, that I'm retiring this year, and I'll be going half-time on August 15th, and I'll be retiring fully from the CSU wheat breeding position at the end of December. And I've been here 22 years, and it's been a lot of fun to be able to be the CSU wheat breeder over this time period. We've done a lot of great things. There's a lot of new challenges, right, that New Energy can bring to the table, and I just want to thank the Colorado wheat producer. Of course, I want to thank CSU, right? CSU continues to support our program amazingly. But the Colorado wheat producer really stepped up a number of years ago, increased support for the program with the increased assessment back in 2007. So I'm leaving the program, I feel, to my successor in very good shape. Talk about that in a moment. And you know, we're able to leave it in that shape just really because of the support of the Colorado wheat producer. You have support and you have good people, which I've been fortunate enough to have, you can do great things. So without further ado, I'd like to just mention that my successor has been identified. His name is Dr. Eston Mason, and he'll be joining CSU on August 15th, the day that I go half-time. And Eston, for 10 years' time, has been a soft red winter wheat breeder at the University of Arkansas. So Eston knows wheat at least as well as I do, probably better. And he's got a lot of skills, newer skills. He's a little bit younger guy than I am, so he's got newer skills. And I'm really excited about this search and how it's played out. And I'm very excited to be able to spend some time in overlap with Eston this fall. So with that, that's all I have to say. Thanks again for your support. And if you have any questions about anything that I said here, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Thank you.